Welcome to another episode of Chefs and Guests on the Spoon Mob podcast. This week I'm joined by Sommelier Chris Dillman, who most of you listening, if you're from Columbus or have lived in Columbus for any length of time, probably know the name from the refectory. He was there for almost 20 years. He was a sommelier there. Also worked at numerous places around town simultaneously. We get into kind of the reasoning why behind that, his CV and his career and where he's worked. He also recently moved out to Geneva, New York, and is now the sommelier at F.L.X Table, which is like a small fine dining tasting menu only restaurant. I think it seats like 12 to 16 people, something like that. Why he chose, to go out there and take that opportunity, and the story kind of behind that and his thinking and everything. And just kind of get into his career, as a sommelier, why he decided to leave the court of sommeliers after, he sat for the masters for like 5-6 times. Just kind of how influential he has been in the wine scene here in Columbus and Ohio. You have Greg Stokes, who's a good friend. And, when we had Greg on the podcast, he spoke real highly of Chris and just kind of his influence. And Greg's currently working towards his master certification too as well. Kendi Warden, she was on the podcast. She's kind of more focused on the education side, running the grape grind and everything. But she's focused on kind of like the WSET and stuff like that instead of going for your advanced or your master certifications through, the court of master sommeliers and everything. And so we kind of talk about, the other avenues too that a wine professional would have coming up. Thatcher Baker Briggs is kind of more focused on the private consulting, where you have Jamie Ma, who's more focused on just kind of like the actual customer interaction and also his journalism career. So we get into kind of all that stuff. It's really interesting conversation. He also has the two best stories of the craziest things that you would see in a restaurant while you're working towards the end. I won't spoil those, but they're pretty amazing. So it's going to be tough to top for future guests for coming up with the craziest thing that they've seen. They're both pretty awesome stories. So make sure to follow Chris on Instagram. It's at best_dressed_busser, Busseer. You can also follow the restaurant that he's working at, F.L.X Table. It's just at F.L.X Table on Instagram too as well. I highly encourage you to follow both those accounts. Also, make sure to follow us on Instagram at SpoonMob. You can find us on Twitter, Facebook. Check out the website, spoonmob.com. Rate, review, subscribe to the podcast, wherever you get your podcast from. Make sure to follow, subscribe to the podcast too on whatever platform. This is just another fun episode. We haven't had a sommelier on in a few weeks, so it's always good to kind of vary it up, a little bit with having restaurant owners and chefs and sommeliers and different professionals and stuff like that. So you can just get a different perspective of what they've gone through in the industry. And if it's something that you're interested in getting into yourself with the wine industry, or curious about wine, or want to know more about just kind of life as a sommelier, Chris kind of dives into all that, and he's super honest too as well about just his issues with everything and stuff that he would have done different and stuff that he enjoyed doing and why he's doing what he's doing now and all that stuff. So without further delay, here is my conversation with sommelier Chris Dillman over at F.L.X Table in Geneva, New York. Thanks again for making some time and coming on the podcast. Really appreciate it. Greg Stokes and Kendi Warden, both people I've talked to, have come up in our conversations with them just because you were kind of a mentor, I think, to both of them. And there's not a whole lot of sommeliers in Ohio, even though you're no longer in Ohio anymore. But I definitely wanted to reach out and just get to know more about your story and everything, since you were at the refectory for many, many, many years. Before we get to all that, how did you first get started with wine, going all the way back to the beginning? Was it just something that you fell into? Was it something that you got involved through restaurants? How did that kind of all first start?
Yeah, a little column A, a little column B as well. Started working in restaurants in high school and college to pay for school, and then just sort of kind of fell back asswards into it. I'm trying to think when it really started. I had been managing restaurants and bartending for a while, and my roommate at the time got a job as a server assistant at the refectory, had a reputation, and I ended up taking a demotion to go there to start as a server assistant, just to kind of get my foot in the door. That was 1998. That certainly helped a lot, because there aren't a lot of server assistant bussers in the world that get to try, 1970 grams and 90 Drew and Clodamouche after the shift. So that certainly got the ball rolling. I worked there for 4 years, worked up to server, and then just needed a break and went to work at a restaurant in German Village. It's still there, called G. Michael's. Probably 3 months after that, they had acquired a space that used to be called K2U in the Short North, and they were going to open the city's first wine bar. So they asked me to build a program there and run it. And that's kind of the beginnings.
You went to, I think, Ohio State, right? And got like I think it was a biology degree. What were your original career plans? How does that line up with wine? Or were you thinking going somewhere else and then just found this detour of the world of wine?
I think like a lot of people, it was originally pre-med, and then you get through your first 2 quarters of chemistry and you're like, yeah, that's not going to be a thing in my life. And at OSU, they don't have an undergrad in pre-med. You have to pick something else. So biology is usually the degree of choice. But I stuck with it. Within biology, you have to take all 5 of the major biosciences. So you have to take molecular genetics and biochemistry. But the first one I took was entomology. And OSU actually has one of the best departments in the country for it. So that's what I ended up sticking with as my sort of emphasis. So technically my degree's in biology, but entomology was really my focus. I don't think it has a direct correlation to what I do, but there's a mind frame that's kind of the same. Entomology is very, very detail oriented. It's taking large quantities of information and sort of collating them and being able to recognize them. So there's a common mind frame that appeals to both, if that makes sense. But no direct tie between the two. No.
When you start working at the refectory, did you always kind of work there and just picked up side gigs? Like I was trying to put all your places in like chronological order. There's a lot of stuff that overlaps and that happens with everybody. So I tried to do the best as I could, but were you kind of always at the refectory and then would just kind of pop over here and then come back? And
yeah, exactly. I lost count at some point. I think I've worked there 7 times over the years. So worked there for 4 years, left, did the Burgundy Room thing, came back for a little while, left, worked at Rosendale's for a while, tried distributor in there for a little bit, worked retail for a little bit. Some of them overlapped where I'd be doing both. Some were just come and go. But I guess the good thing about an old school established restaurant that doesn't change a whole lot is you can come back after 4 years and your information is probably still on the computer. You can clock in right away and not a lot has changed. So, not burning any bridges and just keeping that door open, and 23 years of working there.
so with the Burgundy Room, I think the first time I kind of learned about that, I think it might have been when I was having a conversation with Josh Dalton. He might have mentioned it because I think they had somebody in the kitchen who was there for a while too. How did that all kind of come about working there?
I was working at G. Michael's and they'd acquired the space and they knew what they wanted to do. And I had some, coming from the refectory, had some decent wine knowledge at that point, and it just seemed kind of the natural fit. They originally hired me to, I guess, move me over there to be bartender and to run the wine program, but then very quickly made me the manager too, which was not my choice, but that is what it is. It's funny now. I don't know if you can find it anymore, but the Dispatch used to have an interview with the owners beforehand saying, laying out what they thought the Burgundy was going to be. And they saw it as this very casual sort of Tony cocktail lounge wine bar place where people would come in for a cognac after the show or after the theater. And it turned out to be absolutely anything but that. I don't know if you were ever there, but it was a busy wine bar restaurant from 4 p.m. to about 11 p.m. And then from 11 p.m. to 2 a.m., it was vodka, Red Bull, apple martinis, people throwing up in the sink. It was like an obnoxious bar where you had to have a bouncer and a door guy. It was a very, very weird circumstance. I learned a lot. It shaved a couple months off my life, I think, in the long run, but it was a pretty good spot. A lot of great people worked there.
Yeah, the college crowd kind of seems like came in after the kitchen closed, just kind of filed in.
Yeah, college crowd and young professionals. Like we would get a lot of crazy, crazy people that worked for limited brands that would come in and they were young. They had a lot of liquid cash, and a lot of them didn't call this their home country. So I feel like they weren't that concerned with what necessarily happened because they weren't going to be here long term. I saw some stuff working there I've never seen anywhere else in my life.
So before that, you said you're at G. Michael's. So is it true that the owner offered to pay for your sommelier exams once you passed the intro? I think you did the intro on your own, right?
I think they may have reimbursed me for the introductory exam because that was in 2003. But I didn't really do anything after that. I waited quite a while. So I didn't take the certified until 2007, which if I had actually, it was long enough ago that if I had not waited, I would have never had to take the certified. There were a number of us who were grandfathered in because that tier of the exam didn't exist originally. So I'm trying to think, but it was in 2007, I took the certified. I don't remember where I was working at the time. I don't think I was at the Burgundy Room.
Rosendale's, possibly?
I think it might have been right on the verge of the two. Yeah, it's a little fuzzy now in the past, but yeah. Rosendale's did help cover my advanced exam. I do remember that, but it's certified. I don't recall, to be honest.
Is that common for restaurants where if somebody's going through the sommelier exams to do that, or is that kind of rare?
It's fairly common from what I understand. I believe the restaurant has a decent ability to write that off as a training expense. I think if restaurants wanted the quality of their service to be consistently better, they would help with that more often. But now, who knows? I mean, everybody's scraping by, so it's kind of tough to say. And that exam has become increasingly more expensive over the years too. So it's a big burden.
Why did you want to do the intro?
Well, he's no longer in Columbus, but there was a master sommelier who lived in Columbus for a very long time. And I knew him through the business. And it just seemed like, well, this is an introduction, so let's try it and see how it goes.
And then once you did the intro, did you know kind of right away that you wanted to do the certified, or were you just kind of satisfied with the intro and like, cool, that was awesome, I'm just going to continue doing what I'm doing?
No, because at that point there was no certified. It just jumped from introductory to advanced. And that seemed like way too big of a jump. Burgundy Room was a 70, 75-hour week job. And putting in extra work for something like that was just not really an option. And I think it wasn't until I kind of wound down and left Burgundy Room that it seemed like an option again. And I think Rosendale's was very big on certifications and badges and awards and that sort of thing. I think they might have actually said, hey, if we foot the bill, would you be interested in trying the next one? I was like, if you're paying for it, what do I have to lose?
Yeah, and I think around that time, you might have even been working 2 different places as like a sommelier. When you're doing 2 different sommelier positions, is that just so you can acquire more knowledge, or is it just trying to pay the bills?
Yeah, it's pay the bills for sure. Nobody gets in this business or stays in this business to get rich. There's a lot of overlap in my resume because I was working 2 jobs to pay the bills.
Before you eventually sit for the master, you competed in, I think it was top som competition, top sommelier, and wound up beating out like 7 or 8 other people from the Midwest, got to go to the finals in Napa. Did you already know you were going to take the master and you were kind of using that as prep, or was it just another thing to like experience, or just instead of doing flashcards all the time, now you had this other practice?
It's both, because at that point, I think the first top som was 2011, and I took the master for the first time in 2010. So I'd already had one go under my belt. Competition is a good experience. I like competition a lot because I come from restaurants. And granted, this is my limited experience, but I found that in competitions, people who work in restaurants and do it as a job fare very, very well in competitions. People who work for distributors or wineries or some sort of sales position tend to fare relatively poorly when it comes to competition. That being said, the exam is generally less difficult than the competition will be because they have a set of rules that they have to abide by. And then in competition, their rules are gone. So it can be a really good prep, but it's not necessarily preparing you for things that are going to be on the exam or an exam style, because there's a certain, at least an attempt at decorum when it comes to the exam. And in competition, they'll screw with you all day long. There's no problem there. They'll ask the worst possible things and do the meanest possible things too. So I really enjoyed it because I come from a restaurant and I'm used to people doing and saying terrible things to me. It's not really a big leap in my world, but no, competitions were fun. I will say the very first year, because you had to go to a regional. So that was in Chicago, and I managed to get through that. And then you get to go to the national. The amount of well-intentioned verbal pats on the head I got from the judges at the national was kind of shocking. And I know they meant well, but several people were like, oh, you made it all the way here from Ohio. And the subtext was, did they make you take the blade of straw out of your teeth and your overalls off to go through TSA? Like, farm boy done good. I'm like, thank you. That's I know you mean well, but it's really kind of a backhanded compliment.
How did you first learn about the competition? Were you invited in, or was it just something that you stumbled upon and just sort of like, hey, I'll enter this and see what happens?
I think 2011 was the first year they did it. And through the Guild Somm, which is, depending upon when you asked the Court of Master Sommeliers, they were affiliated with it or they were not, depending upon what sexual predator they were allying themselves with at that point in time. It was a resource that people used. And since the competition was sponsored by them, it's like, hey, it's $15. Go ahead and enter it, see what happens. And I was like, I got $15. Let's see how this goes. A month and a half later, 2 months later at the Nationals.
Now, when you do the competition, the regional part in Chicago, like you said, is there service, theory, and blind tasting, just like it would be for all the exams too as well?
The only difference, well, I guess it's not an entirely different difference, but the question and answer, the theory is written. So it's more like the advanced exam, whereas the master, it's verbal. But it's still the same format. It's blind tasting, it's service, and theory.
So how did they score it? Was it like you get points for each one, or was it just, there's 5 judges and they're like, he obviously did the best over these 4 or 5 other people?
Well, it's the board of master sommeliers. Nobody has any goddamn idea how they score anything. That's the rub. Part of why I no longer participate in that organization is the fact that nobody tells you anything. You don't know what you scored. You don't know how you scored. You don't know what you missed. I will say at the national competition, both years they did reveal the identity of the wines, which the entire universe of wine didn't come collapsing down when they revealed the identity of those wines. So I don't know why they didn't take that lesson and apply it to the exam as a broader entity, but that's the one thing they did. They would reveal what the wines were. A good step there. But otherwise, I don't know. The only thing I know is that first year at the regionals, they said the scores for service and tasting were almost equal amongst all the participants. And that theory is what won it for me. But other than that, I have no idea.
So a year before that, though, you sat for the master for the first time. You did it 3 times, right?
One of them was negated because of the cheating scandal. So it's 5 with a retry.
Oh, was that the year that didn't some people already know what wines or something were before?
There were multiple instances of cheating. This is the one where it actually came to a head. A master revealed the identity of 2 of the wines to candidates beforehand.
Oh, so they wiped out everybody's test.
Well, right or wrong, they wiped out 25 people's passes, and a number of them never passed again. And there's been lawsuits, and yeah. So five times or 6, depending on how you want to count things.
That's 6 to me.
It felt like 6, I'll tell you that.
So the first time when you're going to take it, I think it was in San Francisco. Do you remember, were you super nervous, like super anxious? Because most people know like the first time you take it, you're not going to pass. Rule of thumb is something like 4% pass on their first time or something like that. It's some really small number. Do you treat it more as like, look, I'm going in this, probably chances are I'm not going to pass. I'm going to try to pass. I just want to get acclimated to how all this goes and everything. And then the next time I come back, that's when I'm going to pass. Do you have that mindset? Or is it just, no, I'm going to be one of the 4% that passes this time?
I mean, I think you have to go into it with the mindset that you're going to be one of the 4% that passes, not to be self-aggrandizing or anything, but having passed certified in the first try, passed advanced in the first try, there's certainly a momentum there. It's been a while since that. I mean, it's 2010. I just think you go into it hoping for the best. They have changed the format of the exam since then. So now you have to pass theory first. If you pass theory, you get invited to the other 2 sections. When I first took it the first 2 times, you took all 3 together. So it was a bit of a different experience. It's much more traumatic to do it that way because you're holed up. I took it the first time in a suburb of, it's Las Colinas, I think it's a suburb of Houston. So you're holed up at the 4 Seasons for a week. You take an hour's worth of exam over 3 days. Otherwise, you're just sitting in a hotel room in a city you don't want to be in, stewing. It's very strange. Now, I think it breaks it up a lot better for people. But no, I just went into it hoping for the best.
During that time, so you take the exam, one part of the exam, then you're back in your hotel room. Are you constantly waiting for a phone call or a knock on the door? Hey, you can come take the next portion now?
No, you get times in advance. So you know generally a week or 2 before what time you're going to do everything. You know exactly how long to stew and fester and worry.
So yeah, you're so stressed and wired and everything at that point. You're I don't want to go anywhere anyways.
Exactly. And everybody's different. Because they hosted a hotel, you can usually stay there with a discounted rate. So some people like to be social. They hang out with the other people who are examining and they talk about things. And then there are people like me who I'm if I see you, it's going to make me upset. Just please stay away from me. I don't want to talk to anybody. I don't want to hear your theories about the exam. You do your thing. I'm going to do my thing. I don't want to see anybody.
You did it, like we said, 6 times. Looking back on all those 6 times that you took it, what was the toughest part?
In the more specific sense, tasting, because that's the one thing I didn't pass. And it's generally the hang up for most everybody, although I know a couple people who have hung on service. I think the biggest hurdle, though, is always the mental one. Anybody who gets to that level can do it. They can do the tasting. They can do the service. They can do the theory. It's getting over that sometimes crippling hurdle of the way the exam is run and set up that really is the hard part.
And then kind of during this time, too, I think you were at Sage American Bistro. You were a bartender. Was that just kind of I get to study, no stress, constant regulars coming in?
1 mile from my house, easy job. Yep, that's exactly what it was. It was great. I don't know if you were ever there, but it was an awesome place.
Never been there, but yeah, it seemed just kind of like a neighborhood spot. It seemed like you had some regulars and everybody was just kind of chill.
Super friendly. Yeah. Now it's a discount sushi place. 2 words that don't belong together at any point in time.
And then from there, I think after a couple of years, you wound up taking over the management of the wine at Giant Eagle, which I'm assuming is the one in Grandview.
Yeah, I started that store when it first opened. There was a team lead who ran the department, but we had 2 wine stewards because, that's a massive department. So Yeah, they offered surprisingly good pay for a grocery store and really great benefits. Worked there for 4 years, 5 years. And I think I still did a shift or two a week at the refectory, but it was an interesting experience working in a giant grocery store like that. Eye-opening, but good.
What was so different between like that kind of giant, not wine conglomerate, but it's a big wine section versus curating, a wine list for like a restaurant? Is it just you have more resources and you can just kind of be like, yeah, we can throw that on the shelf, because we have the space for it? Or is it still trying to figure out what's moving, what's selling, what fits within?
Yeah, it's weirdly kind of just the opposite. You have all the space in the world, but a lot of limitations on what you offer based upon what's going to move fast enough. Because it really is all about volume and getting enough things to move. And coming from restaurants where there are things that we may go through one case a year, at a big place like that, there are things where you may go through one case in an afternoon. And just the sheer volume of things. We did a lot of beer too. That was probably the more eye-opening. The volumes, the rabid fandom for certain beers, people following delivery trucks around on allocation days was really an eye-opener to me. Yeah, just the volume needed to keep a store like that going was probably the thing that surprised me the most.
People following the delivery trucks, is that like Christmas ale? There was a time where Great Lakes made Christmas ale and it was just 3 weeks. And now they have like so much of it, they almost kind of produce it year round. But there was a time where it was, oh, it's here, you go get it. Otherwise, you're never going to see it for another year.
The following of the trucks around was actually Founders KBS when it was in the same sort of zone. But the Christmas ale was baffling to me the first year. But it reached the point to where we would get it delivered on, I think, a Friday, but you couldn't sell it until Monday. But I would have to go in to our POS system and alter the 6-pack and case price so that they would ring up at $25,000, because people would literally sneak into the stock room when nobody was looking, grab a 6-pack or a case, go to the farthest cashier they could find, preferably somebody who was like 17, had no idea, and try and sneak out and buy it that way. And the only way to raise alarm bells if it rang up at $25,000. And it was the only way to stop people. It's the most ludicrous, childish behavior. It stopped them from doing it.
That's wild. That's crazy. I didn't know. I mean, I knew it was in high demand back in the day before they increased their production stuff.
Oh, and people would get pissy, remarkably angry that they could have one 6-pack. And they're like, can I go out in my car and come back and have another one? I'm like, I'm going to remember your face. We're right here. No, what are you talking about? No, how about I just take the 6-pack back and you go get nothing? What's wrong with you? It was a baffling, grown adults behaving like the most petulant children over beer. It still blows my mind to this day.
It probably still happens too. I mean, it doesn't sound like a whole lot's changed.
I'm sure if Hetty Topper or something like that ever makes it into Ohio, it'll probably be the same way.
2014, I think you wound up taking on the WSET, which is the Wine and Spirits Education Trust. You got your level 3 diploma. What made you branch off and take on that? I think at the time you're still going for the master too as well. So was it just something new, different challenge?
It was not my idea. That was actually Giant Eagle. They were paying for the employees to take it. And they're like, hey, everybody's doing this. Do you want to sit in? I'm like, well, as long as I don't have to do any active studying, I don't care. So I'm sorry not to be glib about the whole thing. But yeah, that was me going in and taking the test with not opening a book and be like, you guys want me to do this? Cool. I mean, at that point, 2 master exams under my belt. The SET3 was pretty basic. So no, that was not my idea. That was something that Giant Eagle was instituting. And sure, I'll do it.
Was the level 3, is that similar to the advanced, or is it more of like the certified level?
To me, it was an more basic certified level. It wasn't even quite that difficult. Obviously, there's no tasting, there's no service, but the theory, the question and answer, to me, it was a low-grade certified exam.
Did that, because of the level, just kind of wash out any desire to do the level 4?
Yeah, and to me, for the most part, WSET is a lot of times seen as either you want to take an education path or you eventually are going for the MW. Since I didn't have an interest really in either of those, I did what they wanted, and here we are.
Then I think after that, you did some wine sales, I think, at Cutting Edge Selections. How'd you wind up there?
I figured there's one thing I haven't done in the wine business so far, so let's check now. I'd never tried sales and, always want to try something new. They still have the best book in Ohio, Cutting Edge. They're a great company. They treat their people very well, and they have an incredible book of wines. And they wanted a 4th salesperson in Columbus, and they wanted somebody to focus on restaurants. At that point, the dispatch top 10 was their big thing, and they wanted somebody to kind of go into those. And I think at that point, they were only in 2 of the top 10 restaurants, and they wanted me to kind of focus on that. I think I got them into, they were 9 out of the 10 by the time I left. But to me, sales, you're either born to do it or you're not. And I was not. It's Sisyphean. You roll that boulder up the hill all month long to try and hit that sales goal. And then on the first of the month, it falls back down and you roll it right up the hill again. And this wasn't for me.
Then I think like about 2017, you took the master exam. Again, was that the last time you took it?
I took it in 10 and 11, and then again in 16. I think 16 was the next time I took it. 16, 17, 18.
When you take it for the last time, did you know going in, like, this is the last time I'm doing this?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Yeah, because it was also, I was pretty tired of the whole scenario at that point, but also it was a reset year for me, which means that I would have lost the 2 sections that I'd already passed and had to start over. And that sure as hell is not happening.
I don't know when they changed it, but basically, like, once you pass one section, I think you have 2 or 3 years to do the rest of them too as well. So you don't have to do them all in a row.
You get 2 more tries.
Was there any other kind of weird feelings when you're like, this is the last time, this is the last shot? Like, or was it like a normal, I've done this 5 other times before, either it is or it isn't, whatever?
Well, for me, there were 2 last times. It was the last attempt that I actually paid for, the year of the cheating scandal. So I knew that, and I think that was actually 2018.
Oh, so did they give everybody basically like, you guys can all come back the next year, don't have to pay? Like,
you got a free shot. They paid for it. Yeah, you did a retake exam. Yeah, you could try it that year or the following year. So, anyways, the year before, the last legitimate attempt that I paid for, I knew it was going to be the end regardless, and that was fine. I was done with it. I had had a tumultuous relationship with the court, and it's the way of doing things for a long time. So I knew that was going to be my end. And then when the news came out that this had been canceled and all the shit hit the fan, I was like, and they're like, you can take it for free. And I'm like, well, I'll take your money. I don't care. So I guess I went into it with I don't really care, with just a little bit of pettiness peppered throughout it. I'll take the shot, whatever. And I remember getting my results, and they're like, so can we give you some feedback? And I was like, nope, don't need that. I'm done. They're like, oh, are you sure? And I'm like, I have never been more sure of anything in my life than I am done with this right now. So no, it was just I left for good reasons, and I'm still confident in the reasons that I left for. Seeing a cheating scandal, then a racism scandal, then a sexual harassment scandal hit the court 1, 2, 3 just after I left, reassured that was the right decision to make. All those things have been going on for a long time, and anybody who's involved in the court knew that those were real things. It just took coming to public light for them to actually finally, I guess, admit to it and start to do something about it.
If somebody was to approach you now and wanted to get into the wine industry, already been in it, on a junior level or whatever, but they're like, hey, should I go test for my advanced or try and get a master? What would you say to them? Would you steer them one way or the other? Maybe.
You bring up an interesting point, because now I'm not in Columbus any longer. So I took a job in the Finger Lakes, and I'm working for a restaurant group who the owner's a friend, but he is also a master. And, we had to have a conversation. We didn't have to, but we had a conversation before I started. He knows my opinions about the court, and I know his. And we go back and forth a lot on that. But ultimately, within certain boundaries, the examination process and the learning makes people better at what they do. And far be it from me to stand in the way of anybody improving themselves and making our industry better. If somebody is interested in exams, I will certainly help them. I will give them advice that I think to be realistic. I try to let them know or impress on them that this can take over your life and really take too much of your life if you're not careful. I try to impress upon people, don't confuse certification with an ability to do a job. So if people want to do it, great, as long as they know exactly what they're getting themselves into. Because I feel like for the generation that I came up in, we didn't get a full fair shake from the court itself in the exam process. I think the generation before us got a much easier exam. I think they got off a lot smoother. The generation, the group I came up in, we were punished by the growing pains of the court and them thinking they're a professional organization who weren't. Let's be frank. And until something disastrous came to light, they never dealt with it. So they were never a proactive group. And that alienated and really did a lot of damage to a lot of people, none of which they've ever acknowledged. But back to your actual question, I'm all for it. If people want to get better at what they do, if they want to improve themselves, great. It makes our industry better. A rising tide lifts all ships. I too often see young people who, I'm a certified sommelier. Great. Can you do your fucking job? can you get people what they want? It's not about you. I'm sure you know who Bobby Stuckey is of Frosco Food and Wines. I've never met him, but he's taken some grief over this because of statements he's made in the past about how the young generation, it's all about the rock star image and, the top 30 somms under 30. Like, he made a good point. He's like, do you ever see a list, top 30 surgeons under 30? No, it's a job that takes experience. You don't get good at it until you do it for a while. It's inherently stupid to recognize people who are young at it because more often than not, they're not that good at it yet. Because it is a service job. You have to learn. You have to learn people. And a certification, albeit nice, doesn't guarantee that.
Do you think any organization will either be created or eventually, if there is even one maybe that's smaller, will eventually supplant the Court of Master Sommeliers? Do you think that's even possible?
I wish it would happen, but I don't think it will. I think the cult is strong enough now that it just won't die out. I've gone back and forth with a few people on this of the mind frame that at a certain point it has to be burned down and kind of needs to go away and something else needs to fill its place. You've got a lot of people who make a lot of money based upon that master designation, and they're not going to let that go very easily. So I think that's where the loggerhead is probably going to be. Yes. Do I think it should end? Will it? Probably not. Gatekeepers are going to gatekeep. That's what they do.
So after about 20-something years working in Columbus, you decided to head over to Geneva, New York. Now you're working at F.L.X. table. What changed? Earlier in your career, you were always somebody who really wanted to stay, represent Columbus. And I think you did that too as well. I mean, your name comes up with anybody that you talk to in the wine industry around not just Columbus, but I think in Ohio, you're just one of the names that comes up. So I think you did achieve that goal. But what kind of changed for you that said, well, let's go to Geneva. Let's check that out.
A couple things. One, I'm in my 40s. I never lived anywhere else. As much as I love the refectory and all the people there, it's the same place it was the day I started for all the right reasons and sometimes for the wrong reasons. And it's just a level of stagnation, to be honest with you. I've known the owner of the F.L.X. hospitality group for a long time. The restaurant is great. Just wanted to do a little something different. My wife and I, we have a house in Columbus and still do. She's actually still there for the time being. I didn't want to die saying that I'd never lived anywhere else and just wanted to try something different.
What's the biggest difference so far between the F.L.X. table and the refectory?
It's a huge difference. The quality of the wine is equally good. New York is a bit of a different state in that restaurants can consign from private collectors. So the wine you have access to is vastly different, but it's very, very casual. I wear jeans to work. The soundtrack for the restaurant is mostly 90s hip hop. We only seat 16 people. Quite a big difference because the refectory, maxed out can probably seat 200. I don't do any less running though in the small restaurant than I did in the big one. Those are the big differences. The biggest differences have been the towns that I live in. Coming from Columbus, a town of 2 million, to Geneva, which is 12,000, has been a shift.
Geneva's what, like an hour away from Rochester?
That's about 35 minutes.
With kind of that big shift, do you feel re-energized at all?
In some ways, yeah. I think it's opened my eyes a bit more to who I am and what I need in life, if that makes sense. I never realized how social of a person I really was until it wasn't an option anymore. I mean, for Christ's sake, the Irish bar here closes at 8 p.m.
It's not normal for an Irish bar.
No, dear God, no, it's not. So it's been a bit of a cultural shift. I'm just taking it a day at a time. I wanted to experience something different, and I'm experiencing something different.
When you're going through creating like a wine list, how do you determine how big or how lengthy it should be? Do you use like a ratio to the amount of seats at a restaurant, or is it based on available storage space, or a little bit of both? Or
in the times that I've done it, the limiting reagents there are usually budget and space concerns. I've always been a big fan, although it's difficult to maintain, of having a lot of half bottles in a wine list because you're basically adding another selection, but you're putting less money in inventory and less space taken up. But yeah, more often than not, it's been a budgetary concern, trying to maximize what you can have and use given the limitations of your budget.
When COVID happened, was there a wine that you were surprised that you were able to get due to, collector sell-offs, restaurants kind of depleting their cellar stock? Some wineries had backlogs of wines that they made available to different allocations for the first time. Was there anything that you were able to get your hands on that you were super shocked by?
I was pleasantly surprised that, and granted, I guess I did kind of ask for them, but for the first time in my memory, at the refectory, we got large allocations of Clos Rougeard, and then we got a large allocation of Vatin's Clos de Naor, which I'd never seen, but in Ohio until that point. Those are the things that jumped to mind. I think those probably shook loose though, because there were restaurants in bigger cities that weren't taking allocations. Because 4 6-packs of Clos Rougeard is a monstrous allocation, and I declined 2 more of them. So that's the things that really stand out.
Did you ever think about opening your own place, like either a restaurant or like a wine store or something like that?
Yep, have for a long time.
Still thinking about doing it?
Still thinking about it, yeah. It's a weird time to do it.
Do you think with the increased interest in wine due to the pandemic and so many people just kind of drinking at home and everything, and then also like there's an increased connectivity, I think, through, social media and everything, do you think more people will venture down an alternative career path in wine if they get into that career? Instead of working in a restaurant, I mean, you do have to work at a restaurant to some degree. I've encountered people that are doing wine consulting businesses and all this other stuff, education too as well. But I think for a long time, a lot of people, it was either you're working in a restaurant, you're working at a winery, or you're working for a distributor. But there seems to be kind of other paths, other careers that people could take. Do you think that's going to continue?
I would have to imagine it is. To me, that predates COVID just a little bit. I think it's, at least in my mind, it's tied more to the overall rise of sort of the gig economy as a whole, to where people, I work at a restaurant, but I also do my consulting thing on the side. Or I work at a winery, but I'm trying to get my own thing going. Restaurant people are scrappy, generally not well paid and resourceful. So that's always kind of been something they've done. I think it's just become more mainstream and maybe more of an option for people, as the idea of like having a side gig or a side hustle has become a more common thing. Given the flexibility needed with pandemics and shutdowns and all that, I think it won't go away. I mean, for example, when the refectory, when we had to shut down, we started doing virtual wine tastings, which I never in a million years considered would be a thing. But it reached the point where we were buying little, individual bottles for portioning 2,400 at a time just to have enough to work with, because people loved it. They could come in, they could pick up their tasting, they could sit on the patio with their friends, or they could sit at the dinner table with their kids and do a tasting. It was weirdly nice for me because the markup I had to use for a retail wine event to go is always significantly less than it is for an event in-house. So the quality of wines I could offer at a virtual tasting were even better than what I could do in-house. So that was kind of shocking. It was incredibly popular. I think towards the end, people were pining to come back in-house for tastings, and I absolutely understand that. But I think to a certain extent, a little bit of that virtual will always survive from here on out. There are people for whom it just will always be a good second option or a good first option.
When you go out to a restaurant or dinner or somewhere, or even just to have drinks, are you able to just kind of enjoy the experience, or do you kind of compulsively check the wine list to see what do they have, what's there, how did they get that?
I always check. I mean, it's just, you can't help it. They weren't getting shit that I didn't have already. So that was never an issue. Not to be smug, but the ref's buying power, they weren't getting anything that I couldn't get. Yeah, I always look. This sounds weird, but one of the big things in the exam during, especially the service portion, is they'll give you a wine list to correct spelling, punctuation, consistency. That I've not been able to let go of. So typos, I have a hard time not looking at those. Yeah, I don't dwell on it, but I can't unsee it at the same time.
Do you think people now buy the story, or do they buy the wine itself? Like, is it more about the history of like the winery and all that stuff? Or is it more just, oh, this is supposed to be this great wine, it's expensive, that's why I'm going to buy it?
Both. This conversation came up last night, actually. Increasingly amongst a faction of wine making style people, it seems like apparently a story is all you need to sell certain wines anymore. That I find inherently disturbing. Ultimately, I can walk up to a guest at a table and tell them a whole story about a wine. But if it tastes like shit, who cares? It makes no difference. If it's got a cool story and it's delicious, then you win. And I think there's too much of this, this wine comes from the 8 surviving vines that Pierre's grandpa planted, and he plows it with his pet mule, Bernice. And then he, trods it by foot, and there's no sulfur, and his 8-year-old granddaughter hand paints the labels. That's cool. But if the wine tastes like Chardonnay that's been filtered through a jockstrap full of caraway seeds, who cares? It's missing the point. Ultimately, you've got to get this in front of people, and they have to like it. The story is cool, but without the story, it's meaningless. And far too often, the story in a lot of these wines, this is just an audio recording, correct? I'm letting the listeners know I am using severe air quotes here. Amongst the natural wine people, there is way too much story trying to cover up for absolute garbage winemaking.
I mean, natural wine seems to have taken off in like the last couple of years. What is the great appeal? I don't really get it myself.
I wish I knew what the appeal was.
Because I don't get it, but I was like, maybe you do.
Increasingly, guests ask this question, and it's like anything, you've got to temper the conversation a little bit. France has enacted some legislation for labeling as natural wine. The rest of the world, pretty much no. It's if I want to call it natural wine, I call it natural wine. My biggest gripe with it is that it's mostly marketing, and I don't like the way that it markets. It says that because of these choices that I make, arbitrary choices I make, this is natural. Natural implies better, or that everything else is by definition unnatural and therefore inferior. And I don't like that because it's not true. Are there people who work in minimal interventionist, low sulfur, regimes and make great wines? Absolutely. Are there people who do extended skin contact wines and have done it great for centuries? Sure are. But there's a reason why those wines work. And if you taste them, you know why they work. It's this random decision-making that's supposed to mimic what nature would do based on nothing whatsoever. That's horseshit. Biodynamic winemaking, does it seem to make a better wine across the board? Yes. Do I think it has anything to do with burying cow horns full of shit in the ground for a while? Probably not. I think it's the fact that if you're going to these ends to make your product, you care. You're paying attention to detail, and that's the detail is what's showing. But biodynamicism also allows you to use copper sulfate in the vineyard to control mold. And that's highly toxic. It bioaccumulates. It accumulates in the vineyards. So it's technically this sort of fancy, non-interventionist or minimal interventionist, whole earth holistic view that's incredibly toxic. Not to mention its founder was a racist and a teetotaler. Yeah, I don't get the appeal of natural wine either. I get the appeal of good winemaking and drinking good wine, but things that are just stinky and I'm being told that they're somehow interesting because the person made arbitrary decisions, I don't get it. You don't use sulfur, great, that's your decision. But you did also make a decision of what grape to put in the ground, where you wanted to put it, what time you harvested it, how many leaves you left, when you pressed it off, when you bottled it. You make decisions. You just don't like the decisions that somebody else made.
Did you ever consider working for a winery at any point during your career? I'm always curious, like if you reach the advanced stage, like if somebody gets like a list of names and they're like, let's see if these people want to work, at our winery. Did you ever have an opportunity to do that? Or is that something that you're ever interested in?
It's cool on the surface, but I think winemaking it's like a mortician or an electrician. You got to be trained for those jobs. You just don't dive into that work haphazardly. It's hard work. It's messy work. It's difficult. I find it interesting, but I don't know if I could ever see myself doing it.
Why do you think so many people are hesitant to try or drink champagne? I personally enjoy it, but it's not as mainstream as you would think, even though, all the champagne houses kind of have this marketing. So it's this celebratory thing. But you would think with the rise of social media and everything that would be something that would gravitate the two together almost. Like you have social media, faux lifestyle with everything that you see, people believe is real, even though it's not. And then you have champagne, which is supposed to be this kind of good time celebration beverage, at least how it's been marketed. Why do you think nobody's been able to kind of either put the two together? Is that the main apprehension, is just those two things? Or is there other things that just people aren't willing to give it a try?
I think you kind of hit on it. Champagne is in some respect sort of victim of its own success in a way. It was for years, to your point, marketed as a celebratory thing. It's what you start off before dinner. You pop a bottle at New Year's. It's not really seen as wine in a lot of people's minds. It's not respected as wine in a lot of people's minds. They have 2 sips of it before they get their appetizers and they never think about it again. I think that's the disconnect, is it's not seen as wine. It's not taken seriously. Also, champagne, in many respects, is a wine of finesse and intricacy, delicacy. And for a lot of people who go out and spend $200 on a bottle of wine, those are not the things they're looking for. They want to be beat over the head. They want alcohol and fruit and oak and extract. Wines that are delicate and nuanced, that's not what they're looking for.
Although you don't technically live here anymore, where do you think the food scene, the restaurant scene in Columbus is headed for, the next 5, 7, rest of this decade kind of years?
I really don't know, to be honest with you. One thing that's always struck me, and I don't know if this really answers your question, but it seems that the city's always been waiting for somebody to sort of take the reins and be a qualitative industry leader. I mean, you have Cameron. I don't think that is quite what I'm talking about, though. I'm talking about somebody who is doing consistently great things in a variety of ways, acts as a sort of a rallying point for other people in the industry, is an advocate for them, and sort of leads the industry. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I think Cameron, paved the way for a lot of restaurants to come behind him. I think still for a lot of people, it's the forefront restaurant group that we have in the city.
Volumetrically, I would agree with you. I mean, I'm not hating on Cameron. I'm sure he sleeps comfortably on his giant pile of money at night. And, he's made some very generous donations to Columbus State. Most every time I've waited on him and his family have been wonderful and very gracious. But he's never really forging any new territory. It's the very best, perfectly, I hate to use the word average because it sounds a little mean in this context, but he's not established. He's not blazing a new territory. We go to Cameron's because my father-in-law is gluten intolerant and they're very accommodating to that, and it makes him happy. Is the food great? No. Is it consistently solidly good? Yes, but it's not blazing any new territory. I think so. That's Cameron's niche. I think what I'm talking about is Columbus has always been needing. Trying to think of an example now. Of course, they're all eluding me, but other cities where they tend to have restaurants or restaurant groups that are making a name for the city. They're doing good things. They are trying new things, but they're also acting as a support system for the restaurant or the restaurant business as a whole. I think they tried to do that a few years ago with Dine Originals, and then it just kind of petered out into Restaurant Week and one big event in summer. I don't know what the solution is, but I guess that's what I'd like to see the future of Columbus's restaurants be. I think we have enough brew pubs. I will say that, for God's sake, we have enough brew pubs. As long as the trend is downward on the pretentious side of things, I think it's a positive. I would like to see better wine programs across the board. And I'm not saying big wine programs. I'm not saying fancy wine programs. I'm saying wine programs that have thought behind them, that have interesting wines, not necessarily quirky or obscure wines, just consistent good drinking. Too many restaurants let their distributors do their list for them, or they rely on, a manager who knows something about wine. I'm inserting those air quotes again, just for the listeners. No restaurant in its right mind that takes itself seriously would open up without a professionally trained chef who knows how to create a menu, control cost, source products, and do all that. So why would you have a wine program without somebody that knows how to run it? It's one of your biggest money makers. You're going to pay $15,000 to $25,000 for the liquor permit up front. You have an investment in this. Why would you not actually hire somebody who knows how to make you the money back on that? To me, a good example, years ago, I got hired at a restaurant just as a server. And one of the recommendations I made to them was that their wines by the glass were like $8.25 or $8.75 or $9.50. And I was like, well, if I make a recommendation, just round it up. That's all you got to do. Because realistically, people don't look after the decimal point. They see 8, they see 9, they see 10, they see 11. And I did a calculation for them that based upon their own numbers, if they rounded that up on all their wines by the glass, they would make an extra $16,000 a year. It's a small thing, but if you don't hire somebody who actually knows the business and is experienced in making that money and controlling those costs for you, you're either A, leaving money on the table, or you're B, letting money run out the door, maybe both.
How does Columbus get that talent then? We're in this weird place as a country where, especially even in the restaurant industry, there's a great need for restaurant staff. There's a hiring shortage, getting people back. And for various reasons, they don't want to be laid off again if there's another lockdown or anything like that. They've found other opportunities in other industries, because the restaurant industry as a whole is usually a low-paying industry. How does Columbus attract that talent that's needed, where the cost of living is great in Columbus, the housing market's out of control, but it's out of control everywhere? How do you get people to come to Columbus to kind of push the restaurant, the wine scene forward to places it hasn't been?
That's a great question. Because I think you hit on it. We hear this a lot that, there's a staffing issue in restaurants, that we can't get people. It's not a staffing issue. It's a pay and compensation issue. This industry has treated people like half-assed mercenaries for far too long. It's almost a trope now. But in the restaurant business, up until COVID, if you were sick, you came to work. There's no question. Unless you were bleeding out your eyeballs or borderline unconscious, you didn't get time off because you had to pay your own bills. And if you didn't work, you didn't eat. I think in a weird way, this is sort of a coming to Jesus moment for the restaurant business. If you want talent, if you want people to come in, it's real simple. You have to pay. And unfortunately, that's going to mean raising costs for the guests. And they don't like that, but something's got to give eventually. If there was a way for the industry to just buckle down and maybe give a united front saying, look, we are raising our prices on our menus. This is why. You like coming out, you like eating out, something has to give. And that has to be the compensation. Why do you expect people to put their health and well-beings on the line to come out and serve you if you're not going to give them a fair living wage? How is that even remotely reasonable? We don't have health care. Last time I looked, and this has been a while, it was actually illegal for independent restaurants to join together to collectively buy insurance in Ohio. It was specifically prohibited. So you couldn't, as an independent restaurant group, come together and buy insurance. That you want to change things, overthrow that.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
I don't know if it's still that way, but it was that way in the 2000s. It wouldn't surprise me. I mean, if the insurance industry is going to find a way to screw somebody, they're probably going to do it.
Is the mustache gone forever?
There's the lone mustache. I don't know. I stopped shaving the first of the year out of just abject laziness. It's funny. We did a charity event. Not charity event, but a fundraiser. Greg Stokes and I did last time before the master exam, where we had like a Somm v. Somm head to head. And we did it at the refectory. And one of the servers, who's a good friend, he announced both of us in advance before the first tasting. And he announced me as the man who unironically wore a Hulk Hogan mustache for 10 years, which was great. I got to give him credit. I don't know. Maybe one day I might go back to it. But the laziness of the beard, there's something to be said for that.
This question comes from Joe Galati, owner of Commune, who was a previous guest on the podcast. He leaving behind a question for you. He didn't know you were coming on the podcast. What's the one thing that you do differently if you could go back and change it?
I wouldn't sacrifice so much personal and mental well-being for a job. No job is worth that.
What's a question you want to leave behind for the next guest? Can be anything.
Who was your most influential restaurant person that you never got to thank? Who had the biggest impact on your career but you've never been able to let know?
So a few more questions for you. We asked these to everybody, so there's a little compare and contrast. Who is the biggest influence on your Somm career thus far, looking back at it?
Boy, I don't know. I mean, in a lot of respects, in Columbus, there hasn't been much of a Somm community, for a long time. So a lot of it has been kind of just forging my own path. So I guess good luck and circumstances might have been my biggest mentors so far, to be quite honest with you.
What's your desert island wine?
This is the last wine I have. It's all I'll ever be able to drink. Chauves Hermitage Blanc.
What's a restaurant you'd recommend that isn't your own? So for this, give us a restaurant in Geneva or kind of nearby that you've kind of found since you've been there and that you'd recommend if somebody was coming through and you guys are closed. And then also give us one in Columbus too as well.
Geneva's very small. I'm not going to lie. There are a couple of places that are nice. There's a little place called Kindred Fare, which does a solid job. Port's Cafe, cuisine's a little 90s-ish, but they do a good job with it. Columbus, I still think, now that Kihachi is gone, unfortunately, I think the best restaurant consistently in Columbus is Skillet. And I make no apologies for that. Great people doing honest stuff, not trying to be anything bigger or more than they are, and just doing it right and always have. So to me, and most times people are like a brunch place. I'm like, they're great folks and they do it really well. And they've been at it for 10 years, maybe a little longer.
Yeah, it's probably about that. Yeah.
Consistently killing it. And they're awesome folks.
Bucket list travel destination, bucket list restaurant, place you haven't been, you want to go to.
Travel destination, Vietnam would be a good one. Bucket list restaurant. I don't know if I really have one. My wife and I, our taste in restaurants tends to run a little more simple. We're not super fancy diners. Michelin stars and stuff are not they don't hold a lot of intrigue personally. Maybe Shapen, just because it's a legendary place and just have never been.
Craziest thing you've seen happen in a restaurant while you're working?
So early in my days at the refectory, they still have a little service bar, which is basically a closet that one person sits in and they make drinks. These are for the servers for their tables. The guest can't go to the service bar. It's just for servers. Well, back in the late 90s, before I had cell phone, that was the only house phone. So I could lean on it and I could use the phone. But off to the side, I could see a group of booths that are still there to this day. So I'm getting kind of wound down for the night. We're winding up. So I grabbed the phone to call my then girlfriend, now wife. And I'm sitting there and I was like, hey, how you doing? Oh, I'm fine. She's like, what are you doing? And I said, well, I'm looking at a woman in her mid-50s pleasure herself with her wine cork right now. She's like, I'm sorry, what? This was a person who came to the restaurant regularly, does not anymore, who had inched over to the edge of her booth and was given a show to everybody else in the dining room.
That might be the best, craziest story that we've had, I think, so far. I don't know if there's going to be another one that tops it.
Here's the best part. She used to come in a lot, and she would always leave her underwear under the table for her server. And I'm not making that up. That server, about 2 years ago, returned to their factory. Somehow the story came up, and I told him, I was like, do you remember the lady that used to leave her underwear under the table? And he goes, oh, and remembered her name. He still knew her name. So I can still see the booth she was sitting at. Of course, my wife's girlfriend, she was like, what? I'm like, you asked. This is what I'm looking at right now.
This is what's going on right now.
My eyes directly to your ears. Yeah. So that's still the time the SWAT team raided Burgundy Room was a close second. I don't think I've come that close to shitting myself in a restaurant. Just after we opened, I had a new assistant manager, and she got all trained. And it was a Thursday. It was her first night on her own. And I was like, hey, we live in the neighborhood. We're just going to be out having a few drinks. If anything goes wrong, you need anything, just give me a call. I'll be blocks away at the most. So about 11 o'clock, she calls. And for anybody who wasn't in the Burgundy Room, it was basically shaped like a shotgun house. There's one long side that had the bar and the kitchen, one long side that had the dining room. She's like, hey, there's a couple on the dining room side having dinner, and the guy has a gun in his belt. And at this time, it was illegal in any way, shape, or form to have a gun in a liquor establishment. That's since changed. But I was like, okay, is he making a fuss? Is it a scene? What's going on? She's like, no, they're very quiet. They're having dinner, but the servers have noticed and they're really uncomfortable. And I was like, okay. I was like, how about this? I'm just down the street. The kitchen closes at 1. If they're still there at 1 or something else happens, call me. So 1 o'clock she calls. She's like, he's still here. It's like, nothing's changed. Nope, still fine. But the server's still uncomfortable. Like, okay, got to deal with this. So I walked over, and from the front window as I walked by, I could see the guy sitting there, just a young guy, probably in his late 20s. And I could see a bulge in the back of his pants. I'm like, so I came in, I went downstairs, and I called CPD. And I was like, look, here's the situation. Can you please make this as quiet as possible? I don't want a big scene. Can you just keep it quiet? They're like, yeah. So it was a back entrance to the building that was on the side street in Lincoln or Franklin, whichever it was. So I walked out there, and I stood in the corner, and I waited. Nobody comes. And then all of a sudden, I see a cop car followed by 8 more, and they block out High Street, and they all get out with their guns drawn. I'm like, so I think there were 8 of them. They came to me, and they're like, okay, you're going to lead us in there. So I'm leading a troop of 8 heavily armed cops. One dude, I shit you not, he taps me on the shoulder, and he's like, look, he's got the big, like the riot shotgun. He's like, I need to know exactly who this person is, because when I come around the corner, I'm going to have this thing cocked and loaded and pointed at his head, so I can't make a mistake. I'm like, what? Are you shitting me? So we sneak in the back. There were big high-top booths. We came around the corner. I was like, that's the dude. And they took off at a full sprint through the restaurant. And all you hear is boots pounding, like shotgun slides going. Everybody in the restaurant side runs like hell. Everybody in the bar side gets up and comes over to see what's going on. So I'm trying to keep people out. And the dude stands up, puts his hands up, and they all drop their guns and they walk away. And they came back, and I was like, what the fuck was that? And they're like, he's an off-duty state trooper, and he didn't want to leave the pistol in his car for fear of getting broken into and taken. Which I found out later he still could have gotten in pretty serious trouble for, but they let him go. So I walked to the table. I was like, man, I am so sorry. And he was like, no, you did the right thing. Apparently they sent one cop around front in case he ran. He's like, I saw the cop in the window, and he's like, I knew what was coming. So he said he pushed his chair back so he could stand up without moving his hands. And he's like, I just waited. And best part, first date.
Oh, no.
The sound of those boots pounding and that shotgun, that is literally the closest I've come to shit myself in public. It was, and that was in like the first 4 months of place being open. Like I said, it shaved a couple months off my life working there.
Food or drink guilty pleasure? Is there anything that food-wise, like if you're in the grocery store, you're like trying to skip the aisle because you know this thing's down there, or any sort of junk food or fast food, or anything like that is terrible for you, but you just can't help yourself?
Yeah, there are 2. The Good Humor strawberry shortcake bars. I can eat a whole box of those. There's no problem. And when the holidays roll around, that Evan Williams Boozy Eggnog. I don't know if you've had it.
Never had it, but I know what you're talking about.
I can drink myself into a bloated diabetic coma on that. I don't know what it is. It's like we get 1 bottle a year and it's got to go. You can't do any more of that. I don't feel guilty about it, but I know it's terrible for me, and I'm almost powerless to resist.
Pick one of the following, which you think is the best or more influential, whatever you want to use. There are 10 wine documentaries, movies. So you have Somm, Somm 2, Somm 3, Sour Grapes, Decanted, Blood into Wine, Bottle Shock, A Good Year, Uncorked, or Sideways.
I have still never seen Sideways. So I have to check that one off the list. Influence, is it influential?
Could be influential, could be, if it's a favorite, could be one that you'd recommend to somebody if they were trying to, if they're like, hey, I'm interested in wine, like what's some stuff that I could watch? You'd be like, oh, well, this does a pretty good,
I'm going to go with influential because influence can be good and bad. And I'm going to put Somm, the original, on top of that list because it's equal parts documentary and propaganda, but it's accurate.
Wine recommendations, under $20, under $50, under 100, and over 100. What would you recommend?
I think it comes in right at $19.99. Might not be the easiest thing to find, but I know the refectory was carrying it when I left. There's a little producer. The gentleman's name is Xavier Weisskopf, but the label is Rocher de Violette. And he's in the Central Loire Valley in Touraine, making mostly white wine. But he has 2 little plots of very, very, very old vine Côte, which is the local synonym for Malbec. This is not Argentine. It's not oaky. It's not trashy, but it's got great ripeness, great texture, subtle floral, peppery, terrific length. Great example of a wine that has richness and personality without being heavy or obnoxious. That would be my go-to. In the 50-ish range, I mean, if you can get your hands on some Tondonia White Rioja of any caliber, be it Gravonia or the Tondonia itself. Lopez de Heredia. Their White Rioja is either the Gravonia or Tondonia. There isn't a more idiosyncratic and, to me, more interesting white wine made in the world. Over 100, boy. I mean, if money's no issue. Well, you brought up champagne earlier. If anybody can find an old bottle of the Champagne Charlie that Charles Heidsieck used to make, that will be a life changer. The 85 especially, money's no issue. That'll blow your mind.
I'm an Anthony Bourdain fan, but not everybody is. If you were, was there an episode, moment, scene that always kind of stands out to you? Or if you weren't, was there anybody who was kind of like a culinary TV personality that you did gravitate towards or really enjoyed, and you were either coming up or over the course of working in restaurants and stuff like that?
Yeah, a big Anthony Bourdain fan. And in fact, one episode stands out, and it's the Columbus one, because my wife was actually the handler for that. So we were at the shoot when it happened at Kihachi. So got to hang out with him and see that go down. So that was pretty special. We couldn't tell anybody about it for months till the show actually aired. So huge fan, big loss. He was exactly what you see on TV. He comes in and he's just making dick jokes, and it was kind of funny because he was in town to do the shoot, and he was doing a show at the Palace that night.
Yeah, he was doing that speaking tour thing, that not one-man show, not really stand-up, but yeah.
We had a couple of regulars. They're a husband and wife. And the night before the show, they're talking about how she really wanted to go, but the husband wouldn't buy her tickets. Meanwhile, I know I'm going to see him the next day at this shoot when we're hanging out for the shoot. So when they finished filming everything, he's signing some autographs, and he came to me and I was like, I got a weird request. I explained that, regulars, wife wanted to go, husband wouldn't buy tickets. I was like, would you mind writing something to the effect of, Dear Debbie, sorry, Chet's such an asshole. See you next time I'm in town. And he goes, oh, for sure. So he wrote out, Dear Debbie, sorry, Chet's such an asshole. Catch you next time, Tony. So I got to give that to her the next time they came into the restaurant, which was pretty rad.
Where can people find you? Social media, website, reservations, plug, all that stuff?
Social media, I have a personal account, which is just private. My semi-work account is Best Dressed Busser. That's the only social I use. I don't do Facebook. You can find me Thursday through Monday. Sorry. F.L.X table has a really weird schedule. We're closed Tuesdays and Wednesdays, so Thursday through Monday on Linden Street at F.L.X table in Geneva. You can find me about every third week coming home for a day or two to see my wife. Yeah, that's where I am.
And then F.L.X table, it's dinner only, right? Is it tasting menu format?
It's tasting only. It's reservation only. $79 for 4 courses and then optional pairings. It fills up very, very fast. I know August is full, and I think most of September is full already. We only seat 14 people twice a night. So if you plan on coming up, definitely making a reservation on Talk in advance. It's recommended.
Hey, I appreciate you doing this. I don't know when we'll ever be over that way. Definitely we'll try and make it over that way once we're able to, and definitely check out F.L.X table. I've been checking out some of their Instagram, and it looks like a pretty awesome concept. So, but yeah, really appreciate you doing this. Hopefully one day you eventually get to open that wine shop somewhere here in Columbus, because we could always use more wine places for sure. But yeah, take care, stay in touch. Open invitation to return on the podcast if you ever have something to plug or whatever. Anybody that comes on, we always leave open invitation for them to come back whenever they need so we can help support them as they support us. Yeah, really appreciate it. Stay in touch. Hopefully we'll see you soon.
Awesome. Thanks again.
Big thanks again to Sommelier Chris Dillman for being more than generous with his time, coming on his podcast on one of his kind of mornings off. So really cool conversation. So super happy to hear that, he's enjoying his time over in New York, still gets to make it back to Columbus. And the restaurant itself that he's working at just kind of looks awesome too as well. So if you're in Geneva, New York, like he said, make reservations. Check out that restaurant if you're interested. And like I said, also follow him on Instagram at best_dressed_busser. And then also at F.L.X table on Instagram. We're on Instagram too as well. So make sure you're following us at Spoon Mob. Make sure to subscribe, follow the podcast on whatever platform you get your podcast from so you don't miss any new episodes as they come out. Pretty much come out every week. Wednesday's Parts Now Known, which is back on. We took a few weeks off just because of some traveling, scheduling and stuff. So took a little break, but we're back recording those, and those are coming out on Wednesdays. And then the Chefs and Guests episodes come out on Thursdays. So make sure to check all that stuff out. Really just fun time doing the stuff. So really enjoy it, talking to different people within the industry. Check out past episodes too as well. They're all in the feed, numbered, labeled Chefs and Guests or Parts Now Known or whatever. You can also find them on the website too as well under the podcast drop down. They're all broken out by different categories that they kind of fall into. If it's like a special recap episode that we've done or something like that too, that's all up there. So, and the website will link you right to Apple Podcasts, which is what most people use, but we're on all the different platforms too as well. You can find us. If for some reason there's a platform that you use that we're not on, shoot me an email. You can either send it through the website portal, contact portal on the website there, or email us directly, spoonmob@yahoo.com. Appreciate everybody listening. Continue to help spread the word. That's it for this week's episode, and we will see you guys next week.